That's good. Well, welcome, Christina, to the Save by Mother Earth podcast. How are you today?
I am doing great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. And you're from the UK, which we were just talking about. How's the
Yep.
weather out there in the UK?
Oh, it's been actually pretty good. It's actually been quite a dry spring, which always makes us worry because that means that it might be a wet summer, but we try not to think about that. So
Oh,
we've been
interesting.
hoping for some nice warm days. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Oh, that's
Pretty good.
interesting how that's so different from here, where it's like this idea of if there's a dry spring, it's really concerning because it means that there's gonna be a really dry
Oh yeah.
summer in terms of just people having water and access to
No. Oh
fire.
no. Here is this interesting, and I mean, like, I'm married to an Englishman, so I've kind of developed the mentality over 20 years. But it's kind of this space of you go, all right, we know we're gonna have rain, but just when? And it's like, will we get a summer? That's the question that every English person has. Will we get that summer? We don't know. So
Right.
yes, we kind of are hoping that the wind brings in some nice warmer temperatures and we can set up our pool and have our summer before the rain comes.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, so one of the things we talked about earlier or previously through chat is just this idea around loving to be outdoors, right? And the spirituality that goes along with that. Do you want to share a little bit about your story and who you are and what you do and
Oh
how
yeah,
you got into
that's a long story. How long did you say this podcast was?
it?
There's a
Right.
lot. There's a lot in that.
So maybe condense it down.
Okay, I can condense it down. Yeah, I'll tell you the highlights, the little bullet points. So I'm a spiritually awareness coach and an energy healer. I've been mostly working with parents for the last 6 years, and now I'm kind of branching out to just working with anyone who is feeling the chaos of our current world, because my passion is really always about finding center and calm and groundedness and your own spiritual connection, no matter how chaotic the world is and no matter how chaotic and busy your day is. That sense of deep connection within yourself. My own podcast is called Showing Up Whole, and that's really what I've kind of developed as my thing. It's like wholeness, sacred wholeness, making sure that you show up with all aspects of yourself throughout the day. And so I've been on the spiritual path. Even as a teenager, I was kind of inching into it and kind of questioning everything, driving my parents crazy. And then I went I was in theater and I was a singer and I was trying to find my way in the arts. And then finally, when I went to university, I dove into religious studies and I was questioning and questioning and questioning until finally I drove my teachers crazy and they said, will you just give it up? Follow a mystical path, stop trying to fit into a box and just go on your way. And so then I did. And I just went into self-development and I went into spirituality on a deeper level. I started exploring energy work. I started exploring all the fun stuff. And then I started working with my angels. And then I started getting nudges. And quite frankly, those nudges, after listening to them, I ended up flying across to the UK from Canada on a random trip on a random plane, which led to me meeting my husband, basically being nudged into his arms. So it was this magical frying pan to the head moment where I went, okay, I definitely need to be listening to something because this was a little out of the world. So, 21 years later, we have 3 kids. We have lived in Canada. We have lived in Spain. We've world schooled in Spain. We've traveled a lot. And now we're settled here in the UK and I'm doing what I do. So, yeah,
Oh my
that's the
God. I
condensed
love
version.
it all. And I don't want to like bypass that amazing story about like following your nudge and finding your husband, right? So like this idea of we allow, if we allow it, we get messages in.
Mhm.
And so how did that nudge come about?
I just got chills. It was a little bit of working into it. I mean, first of all, I didn't really know what I was following. I was kind of just listening to this inner intuition that I wasn't for the dating game. I wasn't like I wasn't supposed to be out there dating. I wasn't supposed to be out there, just kind of looking for someone. Instead, I knew that there was a someone. And I had always known this. And finally I just went, fine, okay, I'll just give up and I'll just follow that someone. And so then it was kind of this banter back and forth between the universe and myself that I just started trusting in that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to follow the someone, but you got to lead me to it. And it became stretching that muscle of really practicing that. Okay, I'm going to listen to what you're telling me. I'm going to follow what those pulls are. And from there, it was about 3 years in the making of me going on travels and, listening to those guidances of being like, turn here. And I'll be like, okay, I'm turning here. Or, okay, like, go into this shop. Okay, I'm going into this shop. There's nothing for me here. I don't know why you've led me here. And then it's like, just testing you. Those kind of things of like, you're just listening and listening and listening, and it became playful. And then after, a couple of years of kind of leaning into that and saying, hey, I want to meet someone. There's someone out there. I started just getting all these different indicators that was something to trust. And then I found myself on that plane. And literally we met September 12th, 2001. So literally the day after 9/11. I was in, a hostel down in Glastonbury in the UK. And, my mom was like, get home now. And I was like, I don't feel like flying a plane. It's like, so. And then, I was it's interesting because I was listening to, I felt like one of my guides was like Archangel Michael, who I still work with. And we ended up meeting. It was known as the Michael Teachings, which was a lecture that was happening in there. And I had gone because I was like, oh, Michael, maybe that's something I'm supposed to go to. Right. And it was just, yeah. So that was a pivotal point in my life, because it meant that even though, we proceeded to have 2 little girls 10 months apart from each other. We lived in my parents. We were really struggling for money. There was so many challenges after we got together. But because of how we met, it was like this undercurrent of knowing that there was this deeper way of living, this sacredness to life that you could tap into. Oh, we did not tap into it all the time. There's a lot of long stretches that we forgot to tap into that. But at the same time, it was like, no, we know it's there because look, here we are. Oh no, we know it's there. Look, here we are.
Right. And the fact that, like, beginning of that story, you were talking about how you were just open to it because you were just kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen. Right. And the fact that I love this when you were talking about being playful with it, because it's something I talk about with my clients and on social media and stuff all the time, of like, just allow yourself to go to the end of your driveway and say, should I go left or right, and see what comes to you. And it's so funny because now that I'm living this lifestyle where I can, every morning I wake up, unless I have something like scheduled or whatever, every morning I wake up and say, which way do I want to go today?
That's
Where do I want to go today? Right. And it's led to so many amazing opportunities.
Yeah.
That even when I've had a plan of maybe somewhere I was going to go, the universe will, like, as long as you're open to it, can steer you to another plan that's much more aligned with what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to tell my son about the fact that you're traveling like that, because we went on a nature walk on the weekend, and him and I are the ones that like love to do that. Like we drive our family crazy because we'll just be like, well, let's get lost and see what happens. And he swears he's got the perfect sense of direction. He's like 12 and a half, right? So he's like, no. And he usually doesn't get me lost. He usually has a really good sense of direction. So we were out wandering across fields. And here in the UK, it's great because you have public footpaths. So every farmer from ancient tradition has to have public footpaths across their farms at certain places. So you can just wander and you just walk, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, public footpath. Okay, so we'll just go. And so you end up with like in fields with cows, or like bumping into sheep, or, walking across massive fields and standing at the top of a hill. It's brilliant. Anyway, on Saturday, I must admit, we took a couple of wrong turns, and finally I was like, enough. But he's like, I'm being a wanderer. He's like, this is what my dream is. I'm just going to go and just take different directions and just see where I go. I'm just going to wander the world. And I'm like, that's great. Like, but now we're officially lost. So we're calling your dad, and thank God for cell phones, because I can tell him exactly where we are.
What is that saying? Not all who wander are lost. Some are.
That's right. He was like, let's go to this village and we'll just start a new life. I'm like, yeah, we'll miss the people back home, and they're really going to wonder where we are.
They might send out the search party.
They very well might.
I love this idea that every farmer has to have a public footpath. It really brings me back to when I was younger. I lived in a row of houses. I think there were like 7 or 8 houses. Yeah, probably like 8 houses. And it was funny because the kids, because we were such a tight community, and at that point, it wasn't big. Usually people stayed home or they had babysitters that came into the home. It wasn't big into like a lot of activities after school,
Yeah.
or like my mom stayed home with us. And I think my neighbor's mom was able to stay home with them. And so there was this path that the kids had worn into the ground that connected all 8 houses,
Oh,
because
that's brilliant.
and it was all in front of every house, and it was just this nice path that went through all, like, and we had trees on the side of our property, but there was a little path that went right in between, and it was
Oh,
just this,
that's brilliant.
it was an amazing thing that just happened
Yeah.
because we were all playing and we were a community,
Yeah.
and we felt like a community because we had that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. It's always really interesting when it's off the beaten path. So even like, you can have a public footpath, but it's still off the beaten path. Like this
Right.
isn't, like you usually have these little steps, and anyone who's in England, that's listening to this, they're probably like, yeah, she's totally got this. Like she's making way too big a deal of this, but still, it's like, you get these little like steps up over different fences and things. So you have to kind of like walk up, step up, and climb into the next field, and then you walk through the field. And sometimes it's like you're just wandering. You're like, I have no idea where this is. Is there a path? I don't see a path, but we're allowed to be here. And there's this sense of freedom. I
Right.
mean, in Canada, you don't go near someone's field. Like that's just like you don't. It's like it's trespassing. You don't do that. Whereas here, you're kind of like, I'm awfully close to this person's house and I'm walking by their cows. I
Right.
don't know if this is okay, but it's just the way it is.
And it
So
must
it's,
seem so mystical for kids.
oh yeah.
I mean, I remember loving like that. Like I grew up in an area that had a lot of farms nearby too. And it was because we knew a lot of people, we were able to, because it was a tight knit community, we were able to kind of go on certain people's farms, like
Yeah.
land. And I
Yeah.
had one friend who had like land that was covered in like in the, I guess it's the spring and summer, I don't remember, like, but covered in like straw or whatever that they would then bale. And it was just this mystical
Yeah.
time to be able to run through the grass
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just be like, I don't know where I'm going. It's almost like its own little maze.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's brilliant. And I mean, it was really interesting talking to my son about it. Because we haven't gone for a ramble, like we call them rambles, and we haven't done that for quite a few months, just because we haven't really gotten around to it and it didn't feel right. And then all of a sudden, we just went, and it was funny because he was talking about it, and he was just like he himself. He was like, it just feels like a totally different world. He was like, it's like you leave the house and you're just in a different space, a totally different world. And in that, we talked about how you just release any of the electromagnetic energy that you've picked up from the house, and you're just away from the internet and you're away from everything. You're totally present. So yeah, it's brilliant.
It's
Really
where
brilliant.
I find the most spirituality
Yeah.
is nature. Do you find that as well?
I always find like I can find deepest spirituality by looking at the sky. I
Okay.
mean, like I've had some of the, the sky to me is okay. I guess where I would break it down into categories. So I would find that I would feel, if I'm feeling like I need defragmenting, then nature is a great go-to. That is where I can find that spiritual defragmentation, and get back to ground, get back to present. Whereas looking at the sky, looking at the stars, looking at the moon, that more celestial space, that would be more like what I call plugging in. So it's like plugging into the universe, plugging into your spiritual source. So that's a subtle difference, but there is still a difference. It's rather than, looking up at the sky is something that I would do on a day-to-day, numerous times throughout the day basis. Whereas I find that if I get out into nature when things are just way too, then I find that then that's where that grounding comes in. So it's a little bit of both, I suppose.
And it makes complete sense, right? Because you're talking about grounding by going out in nature and like walking on the ground, and then this whole plugging in, like in terms of using the sky and things like that, which
Yeah.
aligns very much with the chakras of
Yeah.
like your root chakra and your third eye
Absolutely.
and crown chakra, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're receiving your spiritual connection through the crown chakra. And then you want the energy flowing down deep into the ground through your feet, and rooting you into the earth. There's also the aspect too, energetically, of the fact that, some like trees. Like the other day, I was like just dealing with a lot of information. My daughters are taking a trip down to London for the first time on their own. So I'm like, whoa. And I could just feel all of this stressful energy bouncing off me. So I go take the dog out for a walk and go for a walk, and there's this beautiful tree. So I always just go and lean up against the tree, and I just gave all of that energy to a tree, and the tree knows how to deal with it.
Right.
So it's like it's you. I have a tendency. I'm very focused on practical spirituality, so it's kind of like I know that in a stressful moment when my head's blasting open, if I try to connect to the sky and ask more spiritual energy in, it's going to get frazzled before by the time it reaches my feet. It's just not happening. So it's just going to expand that. And yet at the same time, if I can't find my feet, if I can't find that process of rooting, then taking part in a different form of nature will kind of ease that flow in. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I like
Yeah.
this idea of what you were saying, like you need to kind of release before you can allow more
Yeah.
new and more connected energy to come in. And I think it's so interesting because a lot of clients I see and people out there want to just race to,
Mhm.
and they do this thing that I think you call like hobby spirituality, I think is what
Yeah.
you talked about. Can you explain
Yeah.
that a little bit more? Because I think that is so important to talk about.
Yeah, it really really is. It's the fact that often we see spirituality as something that we do in the pastime. It becomes that hobby on the shelf. It's like, oh, I'm going to do some spiritual stuff now. So it's like get out the crystals or go get the oracle cards. And I mean like those are things that I do all the time, but we are spiritual beings. We're having a physical experience. There's no getting away from being spiritual. This is not something that you have to decide, oh, I'm going to be spiritual. You are spiritual. You are a spirit. This is who you are. And so therefore it's really about integrating that into your heart and mind and soul, that every single moment of your life is a spiritual thing. And that can be even when you're paying your bills, you are taking part in an energetic process. And the hobby, I mean, like, I can do a good full moon ritual as well as the next one. I love spiritual practices. Like they excite me and they thrill me. And at the same time, too, I know that they are worthwhile because they actually physicalize things you're really showing the universe, hey, I'm committed. Look at this. I'm doing this. But too often, a hobby spiritual life can be about, oh yeah, I'm going to try that. Oh yeah, I'm going to do that. This is fun. This is great. Okay. Oh, I'm really stressed. I'm too stressed to meditate. I can't do that right now. And you go, oh my God, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to relieve that stress. Another way to look at it is that we really get caught up in the world and the world's processing and what we're supposed to think about and how you should act and the roles that you should fill. And if you put the priority on those and what your active life is doing, then spirituality becomes one of them. But really, it can be like petrol to your car. It is the fuel that helps you drive through your day. So, yeah,
Yes.
that's really, it's an active part of life
Yes.
rather than something to just pick up and drop.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because when I was thinking about my own spiritual journey, it almost started as like the hobby.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to a reader today and get that
Yep.
message. But then I might forget about it for a little bit. And
Yep.
then, this crystal's pretty. Number one, I've always been drawn to rocks and
Yep.
rocks anyway. And so it was like, I would get these crystals and I put them away and forget about them. And then I would get, a oracle deck. And then it became something where I was like, oh, this is becoming me, or I'm
Yep.
already it, or it's
Yep.
all like, right. It's
Yep.
like this whole big, I love this setting. You said you are a spirit. This is who you are.
Yep.
And so I think that is the essence of it. I think a lot of people start off as like hobbies and then they start to see, oh, wait a minute, this is working. This isn't
Yep.
just, this is something real here.
Yep.
And now, like you said, those full moon rituals and things like that, that just become part of your full practice that you're doing all the
Exactly.
time.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, when you start to go down this journey, one thing that I've talked with clients and had to go through myself as well is there's going to be a change sometimes with relationships with people as you go through this. Did you experience that as well?
Um, yes and no. That's one of the beautiful things about moving around a lot, really, is that your relationships change anyway. It's also the same thing as when you become a parent. Your relationships change anyway. So there's definitely that flexibility. There's also always the same challenge that when you actually commit to a spiritual life, and when you actually say, okay, I'm going to actually focus on showing up whole, what you end up doing is you start seeing the world from a wider perspective. So because of that, then it's really hard to function on that same one line story that a lot of people will talk about. So, I was always naturally a questioner, as I said, like, I drove my parents crazy because it was always like, yeah, but why? But why? But why? I didn't, trust authority. I didn't really, I was the first one to speak up. And when you decide to listen to your inner guidance, it works against logic, and the world functions on logic.
Right.
So you're always going to you got to kind of reconcile that. You got to reconcile the fact that it's like, yeah, you know what? People are not going to get it. And that's okay. They're not going to get it.
Right.
I think an important thing to draw in on this, and drawing from what you talked a little bit about, with trying it out as a hobby first, and kind of easing into it, you have to remember that your subconscious brain is really, it's going to fight back for a little while of actually expanding past the logic you were raised in. Like, our brain patterns get established at a very young age, is like 7 to 9 years old. And so that means that you have to reprogram that brain, and so that's what we spend time doing. So every time you get, try out the crystal, I really like this, it makes sense that you're going to forget, because your brain wants your
Right.
patterns. It's like, we've been practicing these patterns for a really long time, and everything you're doing is feeling very unsafe to us because it's very different than what we usually do. So we're going to make you forget about that. And so that's why the more you practice it, the more you practice it, the more you practice it, suddenly you're changing those brain patterns, and you're actually creating a new habit, which means that it means that you can actually allow it in a little bit more. It becomes more natural. It becomes who you are. And so you got to give yourself some grace in that. So often people are like, I keep forgetting to do those things. It's like, yeah, I know, because your brain is getting in the way,
Right.
saying, do not do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I find when I'm under stress or kind of in more of a space where I'm like, oh, I don't know. I start questioning it again. And I'm like, no, no, no. I know this works. Like, just stick with it, because it is this is my path. This is where I'm supposed to be going. And this is it hasn't steered me wrong yet.
Yeah.
But it's very funny because in those moments when it's just like, oh, you
Yes.
start to be like, oh wait, this doesn't seem right, or no, this can't be that. And then you're just that
Yeah.
it helps not knock
Yeah.
you back. Like you said, it's that
Yeah.
past conditioning.
It is, absolutely. And it's interesting because I remember years ago I met with a hypnotherapist, and she was talking about, she's like, like, you think about it like a well-worn path. Your brain has been practicing a same road. Okay, we can use the concept of the well-worn path in the field, right?
Right.
That is your brain. Is like, that has been walked over and over and over again. Well, imagine going to a field and being like, yeah, okay, that's a nice path, but we're actually going to change it. And we're going to make a new path here. That's hard. You have to walk that a number of times before the other one gets overgrown and you're walking that one. That's what our brains do. And we forget that our brains are part of our physical bodies. It responds to homeostasis, it responds to balance. It doesn't want change. Meanwhile, spiritually, we're like, oh, new things. Oh, okay, this is exciting. I love to expand. I love to grow. But our brains are like, no, you don't. Like, balance. There's always that. And I don't think enough people talk about the fact that that is what limiting beliefs are. It's like,
Right.
we hold on to them for a reason. It's safe zone.
Right.
They serve us.
Right. And
And
I think a lot of
yeah.
times when people challenge things that we know are the right path or the right thing we're supposed to do, a lot of it is their own fear of what's coming up for them, because it feels like
Yeah.
they're getting knocked off balance if you make that decision
Sure.
that it doesn't feel right to them.
No, exactly. Well, and it's like, oh, wait, they've like stepped outside that realm of what that reality looks like. That means I could do that too. Oh dear. that's like bringing a whole bunch of stuff up. Like, so yeah. And that too, it's interesting because the truth is that, and I just realized that I forgot to close my blinds, so you're gonna get these really interesting like
No
things across
worries.
my face as the sun changes. But really, it is about that life is this journey, and it's actually okay if your patterns go, haywire, because hey, homeostasis usually kicks in when you're actually making a massive change. So just persevere and keep practicing them, and then you'll find yourself in that new up level space, and it'll all be newly integrated. So yeah.
So cool. So
Yeah.
what tips would you have for the listeners that can kind of help them dive into their own spirituality more?
To dive into your own spirituality more,
Or any tips you would want to share?
I would say, well, I don't know, that's a good, like, trust me, I can list off. I was like, which tips do I share? Would you ask this big question? Um, I would probably suggest, first of all, like we mentioned, just play around with your intuition. Ask a question and see what shows up. You can do like what you said. It's like, go to the edge of the driveway and ask which way to go. You can be like, okay, little story, interesting background with that. The other day, I was a little concerned. My son just didn't seem like he was really sparking. He was kind of setting his patterns. And I reached out to the universe and I said, hey, need something. I don't know what to do there. Can you take care of that one? And then the next day, that was when it was like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? And it came out of nowhere. It was just like, oh. And by the end of the day, he's like, my God, I've needed to do that so bad. I didn't even know. And he was totally back to
Wow.
connection. And those are the things that you trust.
Yes.
So definitely, first tip, just ask. You have angels sitting there waiting for you to respond. Just ask. They're there. On a practical tool, my practical tool is always like one of the biggest ones. Whenever people ask me for a tip, it's always the same thing. Focus on your feet. Energy always flows from the top of your head and flows down through your body. And any energy healer will tell you that where attention goes, energy flows. So when you imagine that your head might be swarming with thoughts and stressful things, all of your attention is in your head, which means that your energy cannot flow through your body. So you focus on your feet, get barefoot in the grass, focus on your feet, wiggle those toes. Your energy will flush down through to your feet and you'll immediately be grounded. You do not actually have to work through all the stuff through your head to get there. So that's always one of my favorite go-tos. And then the other one, which one shall we do? I would probably say connect to your heart rather than your head. So if you are feeling swarmed and focusing on your feet is kind of like, okay, now what? Put your hands on your heart and ask there. And as soon as you ask there, you're going to find that you do receive new information. You're going to feel more centered, more present, and you'll connect to a deeper version of yourself. Yeah.
Those are great tips. And so I like how each one is separate, but also very intertwined with the other, right? One time I said to one of my clients I was working with, I said, yeah, you can go out. I think I was doing a training on like tapping into your intuition. And I was like, yeah, you just go to the end of your driveway and figure out whether you want to turn right or left. And this person, she's a friend of mine as well. She goes, okay, Heather, here's the test. You have to get to my house and I'm not going to tell you where I live. I was like, okay, well, we're not going to go down that road because that's not aligning with. But it was just very funny.
I bet you could have done it. I know that when, like energy healing trainings, I don't know if you do any energy healing, but energy healing trainings are always so much fun. I remember when I did my energy healing training, we had to play hide and seek, but one person was hiding and the other, like we paired off it. We only had to find one person, and one person was sitting in like a separate part of the place, close your eyes, and you had to do hide and seek without moving. So you actually had to find their energy in the place. And it was amazing watching how every single person in the class, actually, once they tapped into the energy of the person who was hiding, they could say, oh, I know where they are. They're there.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder, that would be a good test, but like you, if you show up at the wrong house in New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, that's true. It's like, it's my friend here.
Hi, I'm just kind of coming in the middle of the woods here.
Well, but then the great thing about spirituality, the great thing about trusting the universe is you go, I think I'm supposed to be here. Why
Right?
am I supposed to be here, universe? You never get it
Right?
wrong. It's always the right.
Maybe that's the person I've been waiting to meet my whole life, like you.
Exactly. You never know.
Yes,
So just trust, and follow the universe. It's always got your back.
that's fantastic. I
Your
love the
friend might
grounding,
be confused. She might be waiting.
right? She might be waiting. I'll be like, sorry, I'm on a date.
Exactly.
Well, and I love this. I love that you brought up grounding with your bare feet, because I mean, something I talk about a lot with the nature-based insight
Of course.
coaching that
Yeah.
I do. It's like if you could be barefoot every day, at least once a day outside, it so
It makes a big difference. I mean, even, a lot of what we're talking about can sound kind of woo, and some people might be listening, but even scientists now are saying get barefoot because most of our shoes, like what, 99.9% of shoes are rubber soled, and you are picking up energetic, like actual electromagnetic energy all the time.
right.
So you got to let it out.
Yes.
Like, just you gotta let it out. So take those rubber shoes off. Like that's like basic science. It's like,
Right. I
so yeah.
I always joke because I love it. I'm like, you know what? That's a compliment when you call it woo woo. It's a compliment because,
Yep.
but at the same time, right, like you said, the research is catching up now,
It
and they're
is.
seeing that everything that people might have thought was a little bit out of the box is now becoming more aligned with research, and the scientists are now proving that it's actually true, and they're coming out with now grounding wheelchairs for people that can't
Okay.
get
Oh, that's
stand,
brilliant.
and they're coming up with like grounding mattress pads that
Oh,
connect
I've
to the
seen those.
ground,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
There's so much that you could do, but you can also just get outside
And that you can just get outside.
and you can
I
do
mean,
it.
it's different. Like when we lived in Spain, at one point we lived on the fourth floor of an apartment that only had stairs. And so it was like, and it was amazing watching living on the fourth floor of an apartment to notice how hard it was to ground. Like you knew that all of this energy was below you. You were that far away from the ground. So we used to have to, like, we used to walk down and just occasionally, but it was Spain. So, there wasn't that much grass. It was like, more like sand. And it was like, so yeah, it was an interesting experience to make sure that we grounded. It really,
And I
it did.
never really thought about the fact that like when you're in an apartment building, you're surrounded by so many other people's
Oh
energy.
yeah.
I
Oh
felt it.
yeah.
I don't know if you've probably heard of Sedona,
Hmm.
Arizona.
Yeah.
I went there and was there for like a week and a half staying outside. There's a lot of free camping out
Mm.
west. And so you could stay like about 7 or 8 miles outside of Sedona on free BLM land
That's
and stay in
fantastic.
your like to stay in a tent or in your truck or whatever you have that you're driving around. And it was interesting because Sedona is so known for their energy
Of
and the
course.
vortexes and all of that. But because there were so many people there,
Yeah.
I did not pick up on the energy as much as I did the town next to it, which was
Mm.
so much more of this laid back, comfortable feel.
Yeah.
And it was just, it just did, it felt so like almost forced energy in Sedona now
Yeah.
because everybody comes there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, here in the UK, you have numerous places like that where people, I mean, like take Stonehenge. You go
Right.
to Stonehenge, and quite frankly, um, it, theoretically, you can process, you go, no, this is phenomenal, but it has become very commercialized, where really nearby you have a small village called Avebury, which quite frankly has loads of little stone circles throughout the entire village. And you're like, it buzzes. And because it's just not as populated, as well known. Or actually, we used to live over in Wales a while ago. And over in Wales, you have, I mean, I don't know how you know UK geography, but you have over in Wales, you have this place in Pembrokeshire where the stones from Stonehenge, like there's a few stones in the Stonehenge, which was actually
Wow.
pulled from there. And I mean, when you think of the size of these stones, like people are always like, what? There must have been some reason that these blue stones were like transferred and nobody can figure out how they did it. And so you like, you go over there and you're just like, you just buzz. My husband and I were driving there once in the middle of the night and we just stopped the car and we're like, I think we just found the place where Stonehenge stones were found because we were just like, what's going on? It was
You can
just like,
feel the energy completely.
oh, it was so intense. It was just this powerful, powerful space. We just sat there soaking it up for a little while because it was just profound. But if you go to Stonehenge, they're so absorbed by everything else
Yeah.
that it
It
becomes
make-
that tourist thing.
So it makes sense that like people in cities that you just need to be out more. You need
Yes,
to get
be more. Be
outside
up
as
more.
much more.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have a tendency, energy's everywhere.
Right.
Like we have a tendency to name these places. It's like, okay, yes, absolutely. The vortexes of Sedona are a phenomenal thing. You have Glastonbury, which is the heart chakra of the world here in the UK. You have different points in time. You have different ley lines that are being crossed. There's so much to
Right.
know, but at the same time, just get outside.
Yeah.
Like there's birds out there who actually know the secrets of the universe. Go talk to them.
Right.
It's like,
It's
go
funny
on the
because
train.
I'm like an hour away from Yellowstone right now where I'm staying.
Brilliant.
Purposely, I wanted to stay here because I've never been to Yellowstone and I wanted to see it for the first time. And as I've been exploring, I'm like, you know what? There's so many places right outside Yellowstone that are just as phenomenal, and they're
Yes.
just a little different, but there's so much energy in them. I can't wait because on Friday I'm gonna be leaving this place and going back into my truck, and there's a space up north that had amazing camping, and it's just
Oh, it's amazing.
lush forest that you could tell just when I was driving through it earlier this month, I was just like, okay, I'm coming back here. This is where I need to be for a bit.
That's
So
brilliant. I love that feeling. I love that feeling. And it's so funny because, again, no logic. It doesn't matter why. You just know. That's
yeah.
what your energy needs. Perfect.
Yep.
It's
I
awesome.
I love that earlier you when I asked you about the story about your husband and how you met him, you mentioned like the chills. That is something I get all the time when I'm on it.
Yeah.
Right. So when it's right, I get goosebumps.
Yep.
Like, and it's
Oh, yeah.
so amazing because I'll be talking with somebody and I'll say something and all of a sudden I'll get goosebumps. I was like, okay, that's what you actually need to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I like to call them shivers of connection because you
Yeah,
just get this, like, oh, and that's perfect. That's
there
just
it
what was
is.
the right thing to do. I like that one so much better than when the internet goes fizzy.
Right.
Sometimes you'll just be at like a peak of perfect connection and the internet just goes, and you're like, oh, come on. Go with the shivers.
My sister and I were talking about that because she's an energy healer, as she went to school for energy healing as well as you. And we were talking about it yesterday because I was just like, oh, when you're on those phone calls or on the Zoom calls and you're just like, oh no, the energy is working against us today. It's like there's too much going.
Yeah, absolutely. It never fails. I was on a podcast interview yesterday with a guest who was a medium. And it was so interesting because we were like, having a total conversation. Her white bars were all like on white. It was fine, no problem. And then all of a sudden we hit something and I ended up talking about one of her guides was really, really excited to share this information. And we dropped to red and it was like robot voices. And I was just like, oh no.
You're like, if you want us to get this message out, you need to let us.
It's like, go slow, go slow.
Oh, that is so
Tech
wonderful.
cannot keep up. Yeah, I know.
So hopefully the
but again,
listeners
those
are
things,
laughing
I
along with us.
love those for the validation of it, right? It's still, I can be doing this for years and years, and it's still the excitement of the fact that, yes, I do energy healing on the internet. And yes, I do have people in Australia saying, whoa, what was that? That was intense. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what it is. This is how this works. Where
Yes.
attention goes, energy flows. And I can have attention in Australia. It's all good.
It's so powerful and so right, like just the
Yeah.
fact that we're meeting, right?
Yeah.
It's such an amazing. It's not a coincidence that you reached out, right, and that we were able to connect,
Exactly.
and that
Exactly.
you're reaching people in Australia, and like
Yeah.
I'm reaching people in Germany, and it's just
Exactly. And you just go, what a wonderful time to be alive. There's so much happening in the world right now. It's so easy to get caught up in, oh my God, why did I come at this time? But what a wonderful time to be alive.
yeah,
We get to do this. We get to talk of this information freely. We get to actually explore these topics. I mean, there's very few generations who actually have had that freedom to be able to really, talk about these fun things and change our lives with them.
Right.
A lot of people just would have those intuitive pulls, and they thought it was something wrong with them.
Right. And they weren't able to break out of the
Express it.
society
No,
norms. Yeah.
no, exactly.
So where can listeners find you?
Ooh. My website is currently spirituallyawareparenting.com, and I am slowly migrating my work over to a different website, but spirituallyawareparenting.com will always lead to my work some way or the other.
Okay.
So there, you can find me there. I also have a Facebook group, which is the Spiritually Aware Parent Community, and that will be active. It will probably be the Spiritually Aware Living Community very shortly, but I can be sending you links for all of them for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And as you change them, just send me the links and I'll change them in the
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That's
podcast
fantastic.
like bio as well. And changing the Facebook name is so easy and you
Oh,
can
yeah.
change the link so easily. So just let
Yeah,
me know when you do that. And your podcast, is that on every platform?
it is. Yeah, showing up whole. And yeah, and I hope to be able to have a conversation with you on there too.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so
Brilliant.
much for being on the Save by Mother podcast.
I have loved it. Thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely brilliant. I love what you do, and it's been a great
Oh,
connection.
thank you. It's been an amazing conversation.